This is Razia Iqbal with NewsHour, live from the BBC in London. Now, to the current tour of a few African countries by the US Vice President Kamala Harris. Today, Ms. Harris will be in the East African country Tanzania, a country with a proud tradition of non-alignment. It's also a country heavily dependent on Russia and increasingly seeing lucrative Chinese investment. The inroads being made by Beijing and Moscow in the continent is part of the reason for the Vice President's trip. We had the chance to speak to the Foreign Minister of Tanzania, but it didn't go entirely to plan, as you will hear. Her name is Stergomena Lawrence Tax. I asked her first how important the visit by the US Vice President is to Tanzania.
The visit indicates the partnership we have with the United States of America, but also we expect that it is going to cement our economic ties and also renew our diplomatic relations.
Is this relationship with the United States more or less important than Tanzania's relationship with China?
We have a number of partners. The United States of America is one of them. China is one of them. So to us, all our partners are important. We don't compare that this one is important than the other, no.
I ask, of course, because there is a great deal of concern in the United States at the way in which China is making inroads in its relationships with different countries on the African continent, but also because, of course, the Chinese invest more than the United States currently. $1.8 billion, I think, the Chinese invest in Tanzania, and the US is just a little under that. What are you expecting from the Vice President in terms of enhancing their interest, their investment, and the trade relationship with your country?
Cooperation has a different dimension. You may cooperate in terms of investment, you may cooperate in terms of trade, you may cooperate in terms of stimulating economic and social sectors. So we have been cooperating with the United States in a number of areas. Yes, trade is one of them and investment, but also in agriculture, which is very important to Tanzania, including food security, but also they have been major supporters in health and education, also technology and the issues of climate change and security. You cannot compare in terms of trade numbers. You compare and you look at the cooperation from a holistic approach. We work together bilaterally, but also work together internationally. So the cooperation and partnership are of different dimension with different benefits. We are going to sign some memorandum of understanding and agreements, and the details of which will be shared with you after the meeting of our two leaders.
You mentioned the issue of agriculture and food security. The war in Ukraine has clearly made an impact on many countries on the African continent. And you have been reliant on both wheat and fertilizer from Russia. How has that made an impact on your country?
The impacts have been negative in terms of affecting our economy. My government has put in place measures to counter those impacts.
Are you expecting the United States, the Vice President, to bring up the issue of Tanzania's position vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine and the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, given that Tanzania was one of 58 countries that abstained from the UN vote to expel Russia from the UN Human Rights Council, and also Tanzania voted to abstain in the other two resolutions at the United Nations?
That is a hypothetical question for me to guess what are the issues that are going to be raised. But indeed, we abstained. That was not the first time. And we believe that war is not the answer to conflicts between nations. And we have consistently advocated and called for peaceful means through dialogue and diplomatic channels. And this is what we continue to advocate for.
Do you accept, though, that there is a perspective, even within the context of the history of the non-aligned movement, of which Tanzania was a very big part back in the 1950s, but when you see 140 nations voting with Ukraine and 40 nations abstaining, in some senses, the perspective could be argued that non-alignment becomes from the US, that this is a kind of manifestation of anti-Americanism?
That may be your view, but as I have indicated that for us, we believe that we are an unaligned country. Let the two countries sit down, dialogue, and resolve the issues.
And is that what you expect your president will say to Vice President Kamala Harris if the issue should come up?
I am not speaking on behalf of my president. She will speak on her own behalf.
But you represent the government.
You wanted to know what is the Tanzanian position. I have given you the Tanzanian position on the matter.
I wonder also if you will reflect for us on what clearly appears to be one of the objectives of this visit to countries in Africa by the Vice President, that not only will the United States be presenting itself as an ally, but also Kamala Harris will be attempting to fulfill President Biden's commitment to take action against foreign governments that violate human rights, and in particular, passing laws which restrict the freedoms of LGBTQ people. I wonder if you will reflect for us on the concerns inside the government that the US, given that it is considering economic penalties against Uganda, that might also be something that is a threat hanging over Tanzania.
The human right is clearly stipulated in the Constitution, and they will continue to be guided by the Constitution and laws which have been enacted by Parliament in line with our Constitution.
And yet there are many who would argue that given that same-sex sexual acts are criminal offences in Tanzania, punishable by life imprisonment, that suggests to many people who are from those communities that their human rights are being violated. Is this something that concerns Tanzania in the context of this visit?
My understanding of the visit is about enhancing our economic ties, not about going to issues which are maybe discussed elsewhere. And we are going to focus on our partnership, enhancing our economic ties, and see how we can enhance our cooperation.
What is your best outcome for this visit? I mean, I understand that, you know, whatever memorandum of understanding is...
Thank you very much for the interview. Thank you very much for the interview. Thank you for being with me.
I'm sorry, are you saying that you don't want to have any more questions taken? Minister. And with that, she was gone. The Foreign Minister of Tanzania, Stergomena Lawrence Tax. I had so many more questions.